Andrew Bragg, welcome to the program.
Good morning, David.
Should the Liberal Party dump net zero in its entirety, as Sarah Henderson says there?
Well, David, the Australian people are worried about climate change, and so are we. And that's why I would have thought that the most reasonable position here would be to stay in Paris, maintain a commitment to do a better job on net zero than Labor, and maintain a goal. Because I think if you have anything less than that, then you are giving up on the idea that you will try and reduce emissions for future generations. And after all, we are the trustees for future generations.
So just so I understand your position, you're happy to give away net zero by 2050, but you want to maintain net zero as a goal in some part of the second half of this century.
Well, of course, because that is the international standard on emissions reduction. You can't create your own standard. And in terms of the date, I don't think even experts like Grattan and the ANU think that Labor will get there at 2050. So I think that's a debate we need to have about the exact date.
And look, the Paris Agreement itself does say member countries should aim to, quote, achieve a balance between emissions and removals in the second half of this century. So is some sort of net zero commitment, be it in the second half of the century, is that in your view a requirement of remaining in the Paris Agreement?
Well, as you say, it's in the text of the agreement, so I don't see how you can create your own standard. I mean, we're all in this together as an international community. Of course, Australia should set its own domestic rules, but the real enemy here has been Labor's attempt to reform the electricity system. I mean, that's what is causing higher power prices. It's not the international agreements or the Net Zero Accord itself that is the problem. It's been Labor's electricity policies.
But you understand the Paris Agreement to require Australia to have some sort of net zero commitment, because there's a view that it's an international commitment. Australia doesn't have to have a commitment of its own.
Well, it doesn't talk about net zero in those exact terms, but it talks about net zero in a functional sense. So it talks about the offsets.
The other thing the Paris Agreement says, though, is that member countries should be updating and enhancing their targets. Is it possible to stay in Paris if we're backsliding on our targets?
Well, you've also got to have a credible agenda to actually achieve your targets, because at the moment, I don't think many experts are of the belief that Labor will actually get there. And so what you're seeing is higher power prices, industry moving offshore, and frankly, not a great record on decarbonisation. So I think the main game here is Australia is a serious country. We can't repudiate our treaty obligations, and we should maintain a policy to do net zero better than the government. I mean, we can't create our own standards here.
But can we weaken our targets while staying in that treaty?
Well, if you're not going to meet your targets, then you're in a different realm, aren't you?
So you're adamant Australia needs to stay in the Paris Agreement. Can I ask, is this a red line for you?
Well, I mean, how would we leave the Paris Agreement? If we left Paris, we'd be with Azerbaijan, Iran, Syria, you know, and a few other baddies. I mean, Australia has never been with those people before.
So what does this mean for you personally, Andrew Bragg? If there's no commitment of some sort to net zero and no commitment to stay in the Paris Agreement, will you stay on the front bench?
But, I mean, it's not about me. I mean, the Liberal Party historically has had a reputation for fixing things and doing things better than Labor. So I don't think we can give up on it. Our policy has to be to make it actually work. So I'm not really focused on what it means for me. I think we're all in leadership roles, and it's important that we don't give up on things that are hard.
But what would you do?
Well, I don't imagine that Australia is going to be in a grouping with Azerbaijan, Iran and Syria.
But what if that's the decision of your party room? Do you stay on the front bench?
Well, I just don't believe that that's going to happen. I don't think it's in the realm of the possible.
Well, it seems that's the view of many of your colleagues, though. They want to ditch any reference to net zero. We just heard from Sarah Henderson, remove net zero in its entirety.
Well, I mean, I will do the right thing, but my view is that we won't get to that, because I don't believe that my colleagues want Australia to be ranked with those baddies.
What's the right thing? Is that staying on the front bench and changing your view, or quitting?
Well, I think you know that that's not on the cards. And
what's
my
not on
view,
the cards?
Well, I'm not going to. I mean, you can't change your fundamental views. I mean, you can't do that. Here are my principles, but I have these ones if you don't like those. I mean, it's pretty much the case that Australia needs to be in Paris, in my opinion, and then we need to try and find a way to do net zero better than Labor that is better for jobs, better for industry and better for decarbonisation. I mean, the fact is that Labor is trying to do this without nuclear, right? I mean, almost all the G20 countries are doing nuclear. They're trying to do something which is probably impossible according to the Grattan Institute and ANU.
So just to be clear here, when you say you're not going to change your principles, am I right to interpret that as if the party doesn't stay in Paris and some sort of net zero commitment, you'll quit?
Well, sure, but I don't imagine that we would ever leave Paris. I mean, we're a party of government, right? We're not a fringe party. We're not, fringe dwellers. Most Australians want us to play our fair role in terms of emissions reduction. So I just don't think that we're going to be leaving the Paris Agreement.
Do you think dropping net zero brings down power prices?
I think that net zero, if done properly, could reduce power prices and will reduce power prices over time. But I think the way that Labor have done it has resulted in higher power prices because of the way that they have played with the energy system. But ultimately, more renewables and a technology agnostic approach where you have more gas and even more coal in the short term and nuclear would have given you lower power prices, more industry and a better story to tell on decarbonisation. But we don't have that in Australia.
Is there going to be investment in new coal though? Do you see that anywhere?
I think the best you can hope for now, given you can't turn back the clock, is having those assets work for longer. But we should have had more gas, we should have nuclear, we should have more renewables. I mean, I think the story here is that Labor have completely destroyed the net zero agenda. I think they have destroyed or are destroying support for it. And in the long term, we have to do a better job on this because we are a party of government. Australians want action on climate change, but Australians also want to have jobs and industry onshore. I don't think it's a choice.
Well, I mean, Japan has a net zero by 2050 target enshrined in law. Canada has a net zero by 2050 target enshrined in law. The UK,
Sure.
France, South Korea all have their net zero by 2050 targets enshrined in law. Why shouldn't Australia?
But who cares if it's enshrined in law or not? I mean, what matters is the
Well, maybe investors do. Maybe investors like that certainty.
But there are a mix of views about how this works across the G20. You don't have to enshrine things in law. What matters are your commitments and having clear policy settings. And the fact is we're trying to do it without nuclear, without much gas. We turned off the coal too soon. I mean, it's been a disaster. And I feel sorry for people that are paying high power prices because of Labor's mismanagement of these energy policies.
You've talked about your own position. What about Sussan Ley? If she bows to the National Party position on this, is she done as leader?
But as I've said to you, David, I don't believe that we'll be leaving the Paris Agreement. We're not a fringe party.
All right, but but the National Party says the same. The question is, if you abandon net zero, can Sussan Ley survive as leader?
Well, I don't think you can have a fatwa on two words. I think that's too silly for words, frankly. And I think at the end of the day, this is the international standard on decarbonisation. So Australia cannot set out its own international standard. What Australia can do is work out its own plan for how it will get to net zero over the medium to long term.
But you're the one saying net zero needs to be there in the policy in some form.
What I'm saying to you is we should do net zero better than Labor. Labor's net zero has been an absolute disaster for everyone in Australia, and we can do it better than them.
But if Sussan Ley as leader accepts a position that has no net zero reference at all, can she survive as leader?
But I mean, what do you mean by no reference? I mean,
it's not in the policy at all.
Well, you can't have a fatwa on two words. I mean, it's ridiculous.
So if there is a fatwa on two words, as you put it, what does that mean for the leader?
But you can't have a fatwa on two words. This is the international standard. I mean, trying to pretend that you're not going to say two words is absolutely ridiculous.
But if that absolutely ridiculous position is adopted by your party room, what does that mean for the leader?
But, I mean, I don't see how it can be because this is the international standard, okay? Australia is part of the international community. It is not actually the net zero accord which is driving higher power prices. It is Labor's disastrous energy policies.
Okay. Let's turn to your housing portfolio, Senator. You said something the other day that I don't think I've heard a Liberal politician say before. You want house prices to fall. Why?
I think for entry-level houses, it is very hard for first home or prospective home buyers to get a first house. And I think anyone who's trying to buy a first house knows that it's too expensive. And so I think we should be honest with the Australian people about that reality. Now, the reason that they're so high right now is because Labor have failed to build supply, and they have changed the 5% deposit scheme, and that has increased prices by 1.2% in 1 month alone.
Well, I'll come to that, but do you really say to all those who struggled to get their first home, you now want the value of that home to fall?
I think in relation to first home owners, we need to be honest with them and say that house prices are too high at that level. I mean, if you're wanting to buy a first house...
You could leave them in negative equity though, couldn't you?
But if you're wanting to buy a first house, like a flat in the city or a small house in a country town, the house prices are too high, and the government in Canberra is making them too high with their stupid policy. So my job is to be honest about these things. I mean, Claire O'Neill says that there's no problem here. I just think that's ridiculous.
Well, the Minister does point out, I think it's 5,778 first home buyers entered the market using the first home deposit guarantee in October. Would you rather they were all still renting?
Well, as you know, the government uncapped this scheme. They removed all the means testing, and they didn't even model it until July, which was 3 months after they announced the policy. Okay, so this has been a reckless change, and I don't believe the taxpayers need to provide support to people who don't, frankly, need that level of support from the Commonwealth Government, and that is bringing forward demand. Don't forget, the government has failed on supply. They have built fewer houses.
Well, I think successive governments have failed on supply over decades, but are you saying these people you'd rather still be renting?
Well, hang on. The last Liberal government built 200,000 houses a year on average. This government's built 170,000 houses a year on average, despite spending $60 billion in rubbish bureaucracy. So they have failed on supply. Then they've brought in this demand-side measure, which is supercharged in 1 month. We've seen the biggest increase in entry-level house prices in years, in 1 month. So these guys have made a complete mess of housing.
The totality report that you're talking about there, it does point to the deposit guarantee as a factor, but the first factor it points to is lower interest rates, as well as persistently higher than average levels of investor activity. Surely you'd agree there's more than just the government's policy here at play. Lower interest rates brings more people into the market.
Well, that report also makes the point that at the higher end, prices aren't changing. So they make the point that the prices are changing at the first home level. That's where the deposit guarantee comes in. It was reckless. I mean, the fact that they didn't even model the changes before they announced it shows how bad they are on housing. The Prime Minister of the country's been using the wrong number. He says it's 0.5% increase over 6 years, which is laughable. It's actually 0.6%.
Now, are you saying any policy then that pumps up demand is a bad idea? And does that include the policy you took to the election to let people dip into their superannuation, take up to $50,000 out to buy a home?
Supply is the main game, and the bulk of our policies will be here on supply. Now, unfortunately, Labor have spent $60 billion to build fewer houses. They've built lots of bureaucracies like the Housing Australia Future Fund, which doesn't build houses.
Demand, though. Sorry, just to come back to the question. It's about whether demand measures are a problem, including what you took to the election on dipping into superannuation.
In isolation from solving the supply challenge, of course, if you only have demand-side policies, you make the problem worse. So we're reviewing all our policies. You can expect to see a full refresh on our housing policies, and I want the Liberal Party to be a party of supply, development and home ownership.
Do you think dipping into super is a good idea or not?
Well, I mean, what do you mean dipping in? I mean, it's
taking
money
from your superannuation to buy a home. Is that a good idea or not?
Well, that policy has been to 2 elections. We'll look at whether or not there's any scope to use super in the future. But as it stands, I think it's unlikely we would continue with that exact policy because there might be a better way to do it. But I also want to be very clear with you, David, that we want to be a party of supply, okay? That is so important because you cannot solve the crisis unless you build more houses. So that's going to be our laser focus.
All right. Look, finally, you also told Triple J during the week that politicians should only own 1 home each. Why is that?
Well, I think there's a bit more context around that, David. But, I mean, my point is that I think politicians shouldn't be tone deaf. This is a crisis for my generation, the millennial generation. And I think people should be conscious that they're in leadership positions and they should take great care because if people can't buy a house, it is changing the country.
Well, Sussan Ley has 3 investment properties as well as her own home, according to her register. Is that the problem for you?
Look, I'm sure you can go through the register and find people who've got 7 or 8 or 10 houses. My point is, I think people should just be conscious that we're in a housing crisis. I think we are leaders, and generations now are looking down the barrel of never buying a house. So I just think people ought to be careful.
Senator Andrew Bragg, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, David.